Yes, how are you, Form 1? Welcome to our lesson today. We shall be looking at the hydrosphere. There are important notes about the hydrosphere that you'll be looking at. And in our lesson today, we shall be looking at the meaning of hydrosphere. And from your own guesswork, hydro means water, and sphere, it's the world, the earth. And so hydrosphere, that means the water found on the earth. We shall actually look at the exact meaning of hydrosphere, and here there's a question that will help us, will guide us to understand what is the meaning of hydrosphere. Hydrosphere is the world of water that surrounds all of us. And we know from the general knowledge and in our previous classes that about 70% of the earth is covered with water. All life depends on water. We know that, it is common knowledge. And after having said that, we shall look at the water cycle, or the hydrological cycle, how water is formed from the atmosphere to the world, the earth's surface, and back to the atmosphere. And to kickstart, our subtopic is water is always in a constant cycle. And here, a keyword here, you can see constant cycle. And if that can be said, we shall mean that, look at the word constant cycle, meaning it's changing from solid, which is ice, to liquid, which is the real water that we have, the liquid water, and gas or vapor. So it is a constant cycle. It changes from solid to liquid to gas, and it continues, the same cycle continues throughout. The next thing that we shall be looking at is as follow. That this cycle, which is actually a continuous, is made of different processes. Like we shall be looking at how does water change from solid to liquid to gas, and how does it come from the atmosphere down during precipitation that we learned about last time. So here we shall look at the first process, which is evaporation. And what is evaporation? Evaporation is changing of water into water vapor when it is heated by radiation, and the sun's radiation heats the water and the water changes into vapor. We have another term that is important, which you also have to be looking at, and the term is evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration. It is actually a compound word which has the word evaporation and transpiration. When you put them together, we come up with the word evapotranspiration. So what is evapotranspiration? It is the combined loss of water through direct evaporation and transpiration from plants. So there is evaporation and there is transpiration, and therefore the two, whenever they happen at the same time, we call it evapotranspiration. It is also a process that you have to keep in your mind. The diagram shown actually is that of the hydrological cycle, a simple diagram showing hydrological cycle. Some of the key words and the key terms that you have come across are as follow. One, here we have when the sun heats, heat the ground, the earth, there is evaporation. And apart from evaporation, we also had evapotranspiration. These are the two processes that ensure that there is water in the atmosphere. They help to get the water vapor in the atmosphere. Now, when the water vapor reaches the atmosphere, it will cool. After it cools, it condenses. So the process of condensation, it condenses and forms clouds. After it has formed clouds, we can all see the clouds are here. The nimbus clouds. The other day we learned about types of clouds. You can see here we have the nimbus clouds, the heavy dark gray clouds that bring rainfall. They are going to form, and then we shall have precipitation. And precipitation, previously we looked at it, we saw it is when that water falls, the falling of water from the atmosphere towards the earth's surface. And there is also another process here called infiltration. Then we have snow melt and runoff. So it is important that you have to understand these terms, that after the precipitation falls on the ground, the water usually does not stay on the ground. It will either get its way into the soil, and the water getting its way into the soil is what you call infiltration. And the word infiltrate means to pass through something going down. So it will infiltrate, and that is it. Some of the water, if the soil is hard, some of the water will run along the surface, and that's what you call runoff. Sometimes after it has rained, we see water actually running on the surface towards the rivers, towards the valleys. That is what we call surface runoff. After heavy rain, we see water running down the slope into the rivers. That is runoff. But water which enters into the soil directly, the rain falls on the ground, then the water enters the soil directly, that is infiltration. Infiltration. So it is important that you get that. Then we have another process. Remember, the first process we had evaporation, second one was evapotranspiration. Then see here, the third one, we have cooling. What is cooling? Cooling is reduction of temperature of water vapor as it rises to the atmosphere. Now, water vapor goes to the atmosphere. When it reaches there, the temperature will cool. If the temperature was at 100, it will start decreasing, cooling. So the water vapor will stay there, but the temperature will reduce. So the reduction of temperature is what you call cooling. When you have hot water at home and you remove heat from the water, or you leave the water after some time, the water starts cooling. So that cooling means the temperature is reducing, to reduce the temperature. Another process, D, that is condensation. Condensation, you must have had this word even in your physics lessons or maybe chemistry. So condensation is turning water vapor into tiny drops of water which form clouds. When cooling continues below the dew point, so it means that condensation is when the water vapor has cooled, it will turn into tiny drops of water. These tiny drops of water will now come together and form clouds. These clouds later on, you know very well that they become very heavy in the atmosphere. They cannot be hanging there for all the time. They will have to fall down, they'll have to drop as rain. So it is a process where water vapor changes into tiny drops of water. Another process, that is E, we have precipitation. And in our previous lesson we learned about precipitation, which is the process through which the earth receives moisture from the atmosphere. Moisture is the other name. If you like, you may call it water. So whenever water falls from the atmosphere toward the earth, that is precipitation. And remember, we also looked at the various forms of precipitation like sleet, snow, we had hail, we had dew, name them. Another process here we shall be looking at is surface runoff. Surface runoff, like the way water runs on the surface of the earth. The surface runoff, I had already told you, explained in our previous explanation. As you can see it here, runoff, this water that's actually running on the surface, this is surface runoff. So it is important for you to get to understand surface runoff. So after you have looked at that, we have surface runoff. And what is surface runoff? It is water that flows onto the surface into the valleys, ponds, rivers and lakes. You understand? So water is flowing on the surface, and it can flow, of course, the valleys. It does not flow going up, it flows into the valleys, holes, ponds, rivers and lakes and oceans. That is what we call surface runoff. And there's a complicated, rather not complicated, but a clear picture of the water cycle. We also call it hydrological cycle, which has all the processes that we've also looked at, except one. We have condensation, it forms clouds, then clouds will fall, that makes precipitation. Then the water will either have infiltration or surface runoff or percolation. Percolation is whenever water flows horizontally into rocks, into the soil. Then we also have, after that process has taken place, the following day when the sun is hot, the water will again evaporate. Now here, boys and girls, is where we have evaporation and evapotranspiration, the two processes, evaporation and evapotranspiration. And there's even transpiration here also when plants lose water to the atmosphere. So it is important for you to note. Having said that, we shall look at another process here, infiltration. We had looked at it earlier. Infiltration, from the word in, that means water is getting in through those small holes in the soil. So it is the entry, that means to enter, water enters. It is the entry of water through pores, joints and cracks. Those are the holes, the cracks in the soil and cracks in the rocks. So whenever there are cracks, holes, pores, whenever water gets on the surface, it gets in. So infiltrate, the water gets in. That is the meaning of infiltration. Then we have another process here, percolation. Percolation, it is the downward and sideway movement. It moves toward the sideway. Water moves toward the sideway that has entered the ground. So sometimes whenever it rains, water falls on the ground. It may have runoff, but when it gets holes, gets in, again continues flowing sideways until it reaches the rivers, valleys, ponds and even oceans. That is what we have discussed about. Then the last one is overland flow, when river water flows back to the ocean, where evaporation takes place again and water cycle is repeated. This is water cycle, that the process that actually ends the water cycle before starting to repeat itself. That is what I wanted us to look at in our today's lesson. And if I can repeat, that the hydrological cycle is a process that ensures that there is water supply. It is a process that runs again and again. It repeats itself right away from water turning from solid to liquid to gas. We have also looked at a diagram showing the hydrological cycle. So if you are asked to draw that diagram showing the hydrological cycle, you have to draw it as simple as it is. It is showing from the moment the sun hits water and there is evaporation and evapotranspiration, then the water vapor goes to the atmosphere, cools, condenses, and forms clouds. These clouds will now fall as rainfall. This rain will now get into the soil through the various processes that we've mentioned. And these processes are either percolation, infiltration, and surface runoff. Then we have the overland flow, and those are the important processes that help to ensure that there is water in the atmosphere. There are some few questions which you are going to pause this video and try to answer them in your books. You will first of all copy all the notes, then you will answer those questions. The first question, as you can see, define the following terms. The first one is evapotranspiration, percolation, hydrosphere, surface runoff. You are going to attempt them, and we shall look at correction later. If there's no any other question, and I wish to take this opportunity to thank you all and ask you to be safe wherever you are. Thank you.